G'day guys, it's Wolfie here and welcome back to the pack. So yeah, I'm here today with a new tune for you guys. This one is a bit of a specky. It's one that we're doing for the engine swap series that we've been doing for a while now, and it's the Jaguar XJ-220. And we're putting the engine swap in. So the engine swap comes out of the XJ9, which in itself was like a Le Mans legend. And the XJ220 was actually also a Le Mans legend, but in its racing form, as opposed to this one, which is the road car. So be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, become part of the pack, and let's get stuck in. Okay, so as I was saying, this was actually a road car. I was kind of hoping that we'd get the racing version when I heard that we were getting the XJ220. However, we got the road car, and I mean, it in itself actually performs pretty well. It's really powerful. It's got a good power to weight ratio. Unfortunately, however, things like fuel consumption and just that little bit of extra top end, and you know, just a tad of acceleration. These are the sort of things that really make this engine swap worthwhile and a great grind car, and you know, also just a great all-round car for a whole bunch of different events, anywhere between the 600 and 700 pp mark. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is go over to Legends car dealership, the Haggerty dealership, and this second car right here, the XJ220 from 1992, is the one that we want. And for 615,000 credits, that's actually pretty reasonably priced. But as I was saying, this is actually the road car. I dare say that if it was the race version, it'd cost a lot more. So we're going to grab that one. And next up, we're going to head over to GT Auto, and of course, as per usual, we're going to do the engine swap. There's no doing the wide body conversion for this, just the engine swap conversion. So as you can see there, whopping great big V12 out of the XJR9. So in this game, the XJR9 is a GR1 car, a Group 1 car, but in real life it was a Group C, and actually won Le Mans a number of times, 6 or 7 times I believe. So for an extra, what is it, sort of 40 odd performance points, we're doubling the displacement up to 7 litres. It's a naturally aspirated engine now, however we'll be chucking a turbo straight back on it. It's still MR, so mid-engine, rear-wheel driven, a little bit heavier, quite a bit more top power, max power, and quite a bit more torque, and the power to weight ratio is better as well. So as you can see there, that's 1.6 million credits, but yeah, look, with all these tunes, I always make sure that it's something that's going to be worth your time, and within a couple of races, you're going to get that money back. So, and you know, I think you're going to have a lot of fun doing it with this one. It's an absolute beast. Okay, so next up, we want to grab some wheels. Now, any aftermarket rim, of course, is going to work. So just choose something you like, I guess, or choose something that goes with the livery you might have chosen. I've just gone with the spoon jobs here. You know, just regular diameter. We want the wide rim width and the wide offset, and we'll chuck those bad boys on. And other than that, we want the front end to be either A or B. The only difference is just the light covers, so A or B, not standard. We're going to choose that. We can put on some, well, they're not actually side skirts, it's just like a lining down the side of the car. So it doesn't really matter whether or not you add this. I chose to take it off for livery's sake. And as far as the wings concerned, I've gone with type A. I think type B might actually do the same thing, but you'd have to double check if the PP points and if the rear downforce was the same. But for now, I'll just go for type A. Okay, so next up, we're going to start with the tune here. As you can see, we're at exactly 700 performance points, and we have a whopping 947 brake horsepower. So we're running this engine almost at its full capacity. The max torque is absolutely amazing on this car as well. As I was saying, it's a 7 litre now. It is a little bit heavier, so we're looking at sort of just over 1.5 tonne. So it's a little bit heavier. Really good weight differential between the front and back. So 42% of it is at the front, 58 at the rear, which is good, especially for an MR car. That's kind of what you want. As you can see, the acceleration performance is really good on this car, but it also pulls all the way up through the revs. Stability is not too bad as well, and the rotational G's, you know, they're okay. So we've got racing hards for front and rear. We've got front body height adjustment of 106 and 111 at the rear. Anti-roll bar is at 7 at the front and 6 at the rear. Dampening ratio compression 32 at the front, 34 at the rear. Expansion 44 at the front and 42 at the rear. Our natural frequencies dropped pretty far down, so 2.10 at the front, 2.00 at the rear, so all the way down there. Negative camber angle is 3 at the front and 2.0 at the rear. We haven't put any toe angle on the front, but we're using a little bit on the rear, so 0.13 inward at the rear, so that's to the right. We've got the fully customizable differential. Initial torque is set to 5. We want to keep that sort of down. Acceleration sensitivity at 25. And our braking sensitivity is at 15. Now I've set it at 15 for now, but if you notice with this car under deceleration, or if you're dropping gears as you turn into a corner, that the rear end sort of flicks out a bit, you might want to sort of drop it down just a tad, so down to sort of like 10, 9, 8, whatever. Just sort of play with it until it suits you. I actually use that effect where the rear end just sort of breaks traction a little bit under deceleration, and I use it to swing the rear of the car around, but some people don't like it. And also keep in mind that dropping that will also affect your deceleration under braking, so when you're really spamming the downshifts. So downforce is at 104 at the front and 340 at the rear. It's quite a bit at the rear, which is obviously going to happen top speed, but this thing has no shortage of it. And you just kind of need to be a little bit aware of understeer into sort of mid-range corners. So I've got the fully customizable ECU, that's at 100%. Ballast is at 99 kilos, sorry. And we position that slightly back at 9. And you'll notice with this that if I increase or decrease that ballast positioning, it's going to actually really affect the PP points. So as you can see there, like 6 extra PP points if you go either way. And it also really affects the rotational G's, increases them quite a bit if you move that any further back or forward or whatever. Power restrictor is at 96%, so quite a bit of power actually out of this engine. We're almost getting full power. We're using the normal transmission, so just the stock transmission, but as you'll see, this transmission is actually perfect for this car and for this setup, well, and for this race. It's just the perfect lengths of gear. They're all set up ready for you. You don't have to change the thing. We're using the high RPM turbo, and as you can see, the power curve on that is absolutely enormous. This thing, as I was saying, pulls all the way up and down the rev range. We've got the slotted discs, but you can use any of them, and we've got the racing brake pads. I always grab the handbrake, set that to 100%, and we've got the brake controller, don't forget to get that, and I've put it slightly forward, so -1. That's more to save the rear tires than anything else, but also it can help a little bit when you're in the wet. But maybe later on in the race, if you've got, say, your second stint and you're not so worried about tire wear because you've only got to do 2 laps, you might want to throw it back a little bit, and it'll help you just rotate the rear of the car and also help get you a bit of slip angle into the corners by throwing that rear end around and sort of increasing your angle into the corner. Clutch and flywheel is going to be racing. You can't really add any perma mods to this car, and we haven't even added the weight reduction or the increased body rigidity. So really, there's not a whole lot to change with this car. There's not a whole lot to add. So of course we're heading over to World Circuits, and if you haven't guessed already, we're going to Europe, and we're just going to click up once to Sarthe for the 24 Heures de Mans. And this race right here, the WTC 700 event, is the one that we want. So just make sure that you've got your wets and intermediates. I only really use the intermediates with this. Even in a heavy downpour, I didn't, strangely enough, feel like I needed the heavy wets, but you may. So another thing to just keep in mind is you really don't want to be in dry conditions too long if you're on the wet tyre. It will absolutely burn through the tyres, especially the rears, because this thing has just so much power. And as you can see, it's not just top end that it really excels. It takes off pretty quickly straight from the start, even for such a heavy car. But yeah, as you'll see here, it's up there with some of the fastest top end tunes I've done before, like the 787B and the RA272. So we're at 300 k's before you're even sort of a third of the way down the straight, and you're approaching 340, 350 even by the time you're ready to brake and and hit that first chicane. So you have absolutely no problems getting ahead of the rest of the pack. Of course, further on, around when you get to, say, the Porsche curbs and stuff, you'll need to adjust your speed a little bit around there, and just be careful for things like, understeer, because it is a heavy car, and the Porsche curbs are, they're reasonably heavily angled compared to the rest of the track, so that's probably the only spot where you're really going to have to slow down. But as you can see, you can power out of these corners and get yourself up to 300 clicks on all of the straights in absolutely no time. And surprisingly enough, the brakes actually hold up pretty well on this car, even though it is reasonably heavy, and probably heavier than you'd expect the car to be designed for. But yeah, it has no problems dealing with it. So I've played around with the suspension settings and all that sort of stuff, ride height. It's kind of why I made the shocks so soft. I didn't think that that'd actually help, but yeah, the soft shocks, sorry, and slightly softer at the rear than at the front just seemed to make that difference for some reason. So yeah, that seemed like it was where it was most comfortable. So as you can see here, we're going to knock over our first lap in under 4 minutes, and you can quite easily do consecutive sub 4 minute laps. Yeah, in practice I even managed to get a sub 4 minute out lap after coming out of the pits. So yeah, I mean, that speaks for itself, doesn't it? So as we're coming around towards the end of the second lap, you can see here that the weather's on its way in. I was sort of hoping to get 3 laps out of this, because if you look at the fuel, you can actually get 3 laps quite easily at full power, even 4. But yeah, in this particular race, I'd have to come in. So I'd chuck on the intermediates, and we would fill it right back up with fuel, because I wasn't sure how long I was going to be out for, and we'd go out for our spell on the wets. Now, I was obviously pretty careful coming out of the pits, and just careful for the first, say, 100 meters, 200 meters, just to get an idea of how the tyres were going to perform in the wet, but didn't realise that the wet hadn't really even set in here. If you look at the moisture meter over on the left hand side next to the tyres, you can see that it's still not very wet at all, so it's kind of like still dry conditions really. And in these conditions, especially when you're on intermediates, and even worse on heavy wets, you want to be careful, because you feel like you can put the foot down when you're able to, but you kind of want to be a little bit careful about it. So you want to use third gear rather than second for exits and stuff like that, because any tire spin, any wheel spin that you get on these tires when it's dry or when it's not yet fully wet is really going to tear through those tires, and you'll see an example of that a little bit later on. But yeah, other than that, no problems slowing down enough for any of the corners, no problems sort of braking or turning into any of the corners in the wet. You have to be a little bit careful when the really heavy stuff comes on, but yeah, it's no worse than any other car, and probably better than quite a few of the others that I've used for this. As you can see, there's a little bit of power oversteer on the way out of some of these corners, so you just want to be aware of that. You kind of find your limits with it after a while, and then you realise that you can actually hit this thing a lot harder than you'd expect. So yeah, we knock over third lap, and heading into the end of fourth lap, that rain's dying off, and I probably should have pitted, but yeah, look, I sort of thought, well, it still looks a little bit wet, and as you can see, the tyres weren't too bad, but didn't take into consideration the fact that it was still drying, and I was still going to have to get another lap done, and I was on intermediates. So yeah, you'll see the effects of that shortly. But anyway, look, I was always going to make it round. So I'd power through one more lap and then I'd pit. But as you can see, the tyres really start to wear at this point. So you're on intermediates, they're already warm, and the track is dry, and it's just absolutely burning through those tyres. It's almost melting them, you know. So I had to be a little bit careful as I approached the end of this lap. But as you can see here, I've got almost no tyres on the right hand side. I've got absolutely none on the left. And even through this section, it still wasn't that bad. I wasn't like losing the rear end or anything like that. A lot of the weight is in the rear end with this thing, so unless it's under deceleration, it doesn't really swing out too much. But yeah, thankfully we made it through to the pits, and then it's just going to be a matter of chucking on a set of racing hards. I didn't really need to fill up the fuel all the way to the top, but decided to because I could see that I was probably going to get another 2 laps in if I pushed. So I decided to, at this point, I decided to make it a 8 lapper. So I'd go out there and just try and, I was basically just trying for a fastest lap now, just seeing how quick I could go, how far under 4 minutes I could get this thing. But yeah, I pushed a little bit too hard too early, and it was still a little bit wet just on the curbs and stuff, so I picked up a penalty nice and early. And then on my way out here, the curbs, once again wet curbs, and I just pushed a little bit and felt it slide, and I corrected, and it just, yeah, unstuck for me. So you want to be a little bit careful of that on cold tires, across the you know, wet curbs with this car, well, with any car really. But yeah, this thing has a lot of power, so anytime you're going over wet curbs, you need to be aware of the power oversteer, because it will spin. But yeah, I mean, even if you're absolutely just puttering around, you're still going to murder these lap times. And as you can see here, we're going, you know, 3 minutes 51. So we'd go through for our 8th lap. We're now lapping the entire field, and actually I believe we might have double lapped some of the back markers, some of the guys right at the back. But once again, we're looking at 3 minutes, just easily under 4 minutes. So I believe in testing the car at one stage I did a 3 minute 47, but that was just being ridiculous and, you know, really hitting it. There's not really any need to do that, especially on a timed event. But yeah, look, it's a lot of fun, this thing, you know. It is a bit of a handful at times, especially in the wet, but yeah, it's something different for people to try out. And if you haven't tried this swap, I definitely would suggest it. Give this tune a go, see how you go. Maybe play around with it a little bit. As I was saying, some people might not really like where the braking sensitivity is set at on the LSD, on the differential. So if you need to, just change that braking sensitivity and drop it down a little bit if you find that deceleration into corners and stuff is flicking the rear end out and it wants to sort of overtake the front. I tend to use that, and also changing that will affect how you slow when you're approaching a corner and you're really spamming the downshift. So if you're going sort of like 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st really quickly, because that is sort of, you know, that's one way of slowing the car down more than it would usually. But yeah, look, it's a whole lot of fun, and I hope you guys like it. Be sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment. Let me know how you go. Let me know what you think of the tune, or if you've got any ideas or you make any improvements or anything like that. That's stuff that I always really like to hear. Yeah, until next time guys, take care, bye.